We're about halfway through presenting the second halves of the second half of Season 2 of the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where we learn history through pop culture. I hope you've been enjoying these bonus episodes that make up Part-2-Palooza. Today's Part 2 picks up where Christopher Mims and I left off back on March 9th of this year talking about Amazon.com. Unlike most of the other topics covered in the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, Amazon has not remained static by any means. On the contrary, not only has the e-commerce giant grown to offer far more than the books that Jeff Bezos originally set out to sell, but it has influenced Americans' day-to-day lives like few other pop culture artifacts. Did Amazon's presence, I assume, contribute to a revival in Seattle? Because I know that towards the end of the 80s, early 90s, Seattle itself was in a pretty rough spot economically. There was unemployment. It was not quite the space age city that it had developed earlier in the century. Did Amazon almost instantaneously help revitalize that?
Yes. I mean, I think Amazon was instrumental. Throughout that time, though, Microsoft was in Redmond and, was helping to grow that economy. Also, Seattle is somewhat unusual among big American cities in that it has long had, a strong manufacturing base, deep water ports and all the rest. So Seattle has kind of always had strong job growth, throughout Amazon's time there. And, sort of the greater Seattle area as well. I mean, it also benefited from the fact that there's room to grow. It's not like it was all stuck on the peninsula like Silicon Valley.
Right. And it has closer proximity to another country, and Canada is right nearby. And if it wasn't for the weather, I've heard Seattle's pretty dreary when it comes to the weather. I think it'd even be even more of the Emerald City that they claim. When did the first Amazon distribution centers start arriving? Or they call it the what is the name that they give it? It's not distribution, but the and I see it on my packages all the time. The name escapes me right now. Help me out with that. It's the big warehouses where they meet the fill all the orders basically.
The fulfillment centers.
There it is. Yeah, I just okay. When did the first fulfillment centers start springing up? Was it fairly early on, or did it take some time?
I mean, it's fairly early on. I mean, they had some failed experiments, right? So, like, when they started to transition to, out of books and into consumer goods, at one point they brought in, a gentleman who had helped build Walmart's distribution infrastructure, and he was trying to help them automate their early fulfillment centers. But what he brought in really didn't work because it was designed for not creating single orders that are, shipped or via UPS and FedEx at the time to individual customers. He was used to designing systems that would take much larger quantities of material and ship them to Walmart stores, so he was trying to kind of improvise. So, Amazon later on, with the help of a robotics company called Kiva, which it eventually bought, really invented the model of the modern distribution center, which is an e-commerce thing.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, they transformed the warehouse into a factory, but the product the factory is making is your order, right?
Right.
So let's say you order like a toothbrush and a book and, whatever else, some paper towels or something, to bring those three items together from three different parts of the warehouse and put them in a single box, that's a form of assembly. Right. So they had to do something that was halfway in between a warehouse and a factory. And that was where the technology and the robotics really came in that made it possible.
Where was the very first of those fulfillment centers placed? Was it near Seattle, or did they move it? elsewhere into the country to get
No,
more?
if I'm not mistaken, the very first one was somewhere in the middle of the country. So typically, when somebody is starting a new e-commerce business, they always drop their first, if they have just starting with one fulfillment center, they always drop it like in like Kansas City or somewhere. And the
Hmm.
reason is from there, you're no more than a day or two's drive, via
Right.
long haul truck from all of the other nodes, which are the delivery stations that UPS and FedEx have. So if you need to get something delivered to somebody in under a week or in as little as 2 days, if you drop that one distribution center dead in the middle of the country, you can get to like 90% of the population in the United States within two
Hmm.
days through
So,
FedEx.
okay, and that brings me to the next part of the material. Going back up to that, because the interstate highways have been there and growing and subsidized since the 50s, um, and all that, and of course that must have, that's what makes. Well, I guess the railroads technically made places like Kansas City, and Omaha, like the center of the country and that section. But that last mile, that last part of the delivery, still now it seems like Amazon packages come from any number of directions. Sometimes they come through the US Postal Service, other times it's FedEx, UPS, sometimes their own trucks. Was that put into was that part of the mindset, was that thought up, um as when they were just selling the books and the CDs, were they thinking of, all right, we know we have these big trucks for the long haul, but do we have the right system for the last bit of the journey?
So from its earliest days, Amazon was using UPS and FedEx to do that last mile delivery because, of course,
Mhm.
they're already gigantic, they already exist. And it's only in the past 5 years or so that Amazon started delivering via its own trucks. Oh, and of course, you mentioned you Postal Service, and they would use that as well. So, Amazon has just always been agnostic about who it uses and will just, they have tons of software and they will just route depending on where you are and where the package is, right? Because it could be at a fulfillment center that's near you, but it could be at a different fulfillment center, right? Or you might be equidistant from three or four different fulfillment centers, depending on where you are, especially if you're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So, they have all of this software and all of this route planning stuff that is figuring out how to get you every single one of those items, within the time that they have promised to you. I mean, one reason that they have built out more and more fulfillment centers and are now delivering a majority of their own packages so they can have control over that whole process, but also so it can be more efficient, right? It's much, much more efficient if you order three different items, it's much, much more efficient if they have all three of those in one fulfillment center. They put it in
Right.
one box and then they deliver it themselves versus it being delivered three items separately from three separate warehouses, three separate carriers. And the way they accomplish that is they just have a lot of software that is predicting demand, and
Hmm.
they have all these incentives for their sellers to incentivize them to have multiple items in every single one of their fulfillment centers so that there's that redundancy built in so that if somebody orders three different items, hopefully they can always be available from
Yeah.
one warehouse that's nearby.
Because in the documentary, it seemed like that last mile delivery seemed to be the most robust part. It seemed like the part that really wasn't being jeopardized as much as retirement and lack of new drivers coming in on the big rigs. It seemed like that was the section that was not in that danger zone of collapsing the supply chain. And um, I know from, so another job that I had while I was in college was I worked for the Postal Service as initially I started out just as in their distribution centers, one of the places where the mail would all come in and leave. And the shift I worked was usually outbound stuff from the area. And it was always like, of course, Christmas season is always swamped, but that was around the time that Amazon started delivering packages through, the postal service, and Netflix was arriving at the same time. And I can tell you right now, Netflix and those machines did not go well together. The machines that we're using to cancel all the mail and to move it. I learned a lot just from being there. Never mind the 2-day tutorial that I got beforehand. But people with the whole Netflix thing was throw your DVD into the mail. We got this little envelope for it. It would be put through with like letters and stuff, and like so many of them would just jam up into the machinery, and it would crush it, and they'd get ruined DVDs. And I remember thinking then, I'm like, man, this is not Netflix isn't going anywhere. This is already the problem, is that they're just being, having all their merchandise destroyed. Um, but I was talking to somebody recently that works for the postal service, and they're saying all that machinery is all gone. Like they have replaced and updated everything, and I have to think that that's a response. Because nobody orders Netflix DVDs anymore, but it's a response to the Amazons and to a lesser extent the eBays out there of all these packages of different shapes and sizes crisscrossing the country all the time, and them having to handle it and bring it to people's homes. So it's I guess if anything, that was something. So we used to notice, we would have a lot of, because we live very close to the Canadian border, right off of I-87, heading to Canada up in Plattsburgh, New York. And we would get more than a few Canadian, business people usually that would come down to the United States, drop their mail off in just across the border, and then they were going to other places in Canada, but they would mail through the U.S. Postal Service because we have a lot more roads. We have just a much better postal service. So Amazon doesn't seem to have strained that too much, has it? Or am I just trying to convince myself otherwise?
No, I mean, Amazon, I think, has enormously, and Amazon and all the other e-commerce companies have enormously strained UPS, FedEx, and especially, the United States Postal Service. They've all had to build a lot of capacity. They've all struggled each in their own way. I mean, I think UPS has done the best, but FedEx really struggled with the fact that for the longest time, Amazon was using FedEx to deliver its biggest or most awkward or most inconvenient geographically packages, which is one reason that FedEx ended that relationship with Amazon. They just realized that it couldn't be profitable for them.
Yeah.
For USPS, they are just strained by the fact that, I think that like on average, 50 packages are delivered every year for every human being, even child in the United States.
Mm.
And that just keeps going up. I mean, every year, Pitney Bowes, which is a technology provider to the U.S. Postal Service, tracks that, and every year that number goes up. And e-commerce, it has fallen back to where it was maybe a couple of years ago, but obviously it expanded tremendously throughout the pandemic. So I think that whole system is strained, and that's one reason why Amazon had to go and build its own last mile delivery infrastructure, and why you see those Amazon vans everywhere. They're not competing with FedEx or UPS in that they're taking away their business. That's just additional capacity because UPS and FedEx and USPS don't have any more capacity.
Right.
We even saw it this last holiday season. There were a lot of postal stations that were just experiencing huge backlogs in terms of getting packages out the door.
It's definitely changed our relationship with the mail and with packages in particular. For the longest time, it was, few and far between that you'd see the brown truck of UPS show up on your street, and then it would park in front of your house, and you'd be like, "Oh, is he getting out for me?" And my house, and it was exciting. They would have the clipboard and everything, or some digital signing thing, and you come knock on your door or leave. And now it's so pedestrian, that it's actually, like I don't question that number at all. 50 packages a person, because of all shapes and sizes, because I come home almost every day, and there's some packages right by the mailbox. It's like, yep, there's another one. Yeah, because we do so much of our shopping that way. So it's clear that the behavior and ideas of Amazon matched up with what Americans like, and it's definitely noticed. I don't know if you watched the new the Santa Claus sequel series called the Santa Clauses with Tim Allen this year. They introduce a character who's basically like an e-commerce Jeff Bezos type guy, and his initials are SC, so you kind of see it coming from the beginning. But there's a twist because he does get the job, of being Santa Claus, but his idea, because he's totally impressed by the way Santa can deliver all those packages. He's like, I'm going to make every day Christmas. And, that excitement, that joy you get of, getting your presents on Christmas morning, that's going to be every day of the year. That's definitely commentary on where we are with Amazon. That our relationship that of feeling special for getting something, somebody took the time and put something in the mail with us, is kind of has eroded a little bit because of Amazon.
Right. I mean, on the flip side, though, how many people send, you know, signed thank you cards or write letters
Yeah.
anymore? So I definitely think that, yes, getting a package in the mail is not special anymore. It's just routine. But along with the digitization of all other communications, um, communicating in an analog fashion, sending people things that you have put into a box instead of Amazon, that's probably more special than ever, because with that convenience, we've sort of lost the habit and the art of doing those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. You have a great point there with the actual process of bringing things to the postal service or UPS yourself, and packaging it all up and being able to kind of personalize it a bit more. Maybe that is a benefit of that, is that it makes people take a bit more care to make their package stand out from the one that says Prime all over it, or seems to have adjusted. Now, we've heard for a long time, and I think at least 6, maybe even 8 years, from Amazon, that drone delivery is on the way. Um, is that something that makes any sense at all? I mean, do you think it's going to become standard within the next couple of years, or is that just kind of under promise over deliver? Is that a business move on Bezos's part to try to bring that up and see how excited people get about it?
I mean, it's definitely kind of been hugely oversold. Drone delivery is possible. The economics of it are challenging. The best example of drone delivery anywhere in the world, is fixed wing drone delivery of blood and medical products like vaccines in Ghana, for example.
Mm-hmm.
They have a huge infrastructure there because they don't have, you know, the same system of, highways and a continuous cold chain, as it's called, that we have here in the US. So there are applications where it's great. There are parts in the world where it's being tested. You can get a burrito delivered by drone or whatever. But the bottom line is, it is very difficult to beat the efficiency of a truck full of, between 80 and, let's say, 200 individual orders, where the route is planned by very sophisticated software, so that the human driving that truck just goes from one house to the next, to the next, to the next, dropping off packages. You can't beat the economics of that. The speed of it appears to be good enough. It's not clear that Amazon's push, and now many other startups, many of which are failing now, to get us, less than 1 day delivery, 30-minute delivery, 15-minute delivery. It's not clear that people actually need or want that for anything other than, I don't know, food, let's say.
It seems like one of those things that back in 1995, 96, we would envision it. We're like, wow, that'd be amazing if in the future we had flying, delivery. Like we'd have our own personalized, delivery bot that would bring things to us whenever, snap of a finger, touch of a button. And I for one, I love looking at like artist conceptions of the future. A lot of those like big cityscapes that people would illustrate in like, seemed like every decade in the 20th century they were like, what's 2020 going to look like, and they would draw these self-driving cars, or of course the flying car, or things just in the air all over the place was pretty standard for most of those. And I think it was in Back to the Future Part 2 where they kind of address that. Um, they show the flying cars, of course, and they have highways in the sky, but there's a few people walking around with like parasols, even though it's a clear day, because it's always raining oil, and from the ones that are having problems, or if there's a car wreck above them, stuff will happen, fall on their heads. And so when I hear like drone traffic to the degree in our country anyway, in this part of the world where we have, like you say, a very efficient roadway system, that would just be like, between accidents and things like maybe malfunctioning and falling in somebody's head, or people taking it upon themselves to try to knock them out of the sky themselves for fun, it might not be the best place to introduce such a thing. But I think people's visions for the future um, always say something about their present, and Amazon has had a role in kind of creating different futures as it's grown for us. And so it's a pretty interesting company in that way, how it's become so all inclusive. So um, finally, I guess, to wrap things all up when it comes to Amazon, uh, do you think that the way Amazon has grown, is this precisely what the late 90s Amazon was hoping for? Is this what they were expecting to happen? Is where we are here in 2023, or is there something that they fell short on, or maybe an area of success that they weren't expecting?
I mean, I think that, look, they became at one point the world's most valuable company. Jeff Bezos fulfilled his ambitions of creating his own um, space company. Yeah, I mean, I think that one reason he stepped back and became chairman was that he did fulfill all of his goals for Amazon, and then it was time to hand it off to Andy Jassy to you know keep it going, and now I guess to be disciplined about cutting costs. And if anything, I think that Amazon may have, the retail side probably exceeded Jeff Bezos's expectations. I mean, it just grew so quickly throughout the pandemic that
Mm,
in some ways it really caught them by surprise when all of that spending on online commerce pulled back, once people were going out again. And so this is their first, contraction. This is their first big corporate layoffs ever. So yeah, I think in some ways they kind of exceeded their own expectations.
mhm.
And by the way, almost all of their profits actually just come from their cloud computing business. I mean, the retail business generally year to year is either losing money or making a little. I think now it's losing a lot of money, and
Yeah.
which is why they're cutting back so much. So, the entire cloud computing business, it's almost an accident or an afterthought, and now it's all of their profits. So, yeah, I think that they have done a lot that even they did not expect. Also, keep in mind that like Amazon is far from done. Like, their smart assistants, they're definitely pulling back on that. They haven't figured out how to make any money from their smart assistants. But don't forget that Amazon is trying to build its own satellite network to deliver internet to the ground, just
Mhm.
like Elon Musk's satellite network, which is
Yeah.
keeping troops connected in Ukraine. So that is called Project Kuiper. I think I'm saying it
Yeah.
correctly. I hope.
That does sound
And
right.
it's still a hugely ambitious company. they've got to rein in their spending on their retail operations, but like, they're figuring out now what are their big long-term bets, and that, space internet is a huge one, right? That could be a whole other business that's just as big as cloud computing is now someday.
Kind of makes their original business model seem antiquated by at this stage, with space internet and everything. So where can people find you? You're at the Wall Street Journal. You have a column there. Where else can folks find Christopher Mims online?
Really there. If you go to Mims.club, that'll take you to all of my links to other stuff. But like, the column is what I do, and the journals where I produce all of my content. I don't really use Twitter anymore. I'm having fun with Mastodon. You can find links there on Mims.club. And also you can check out my book, arriving today. And if you want to really get the condensed 40-minute version, just Google chain reaction Wall Street Journal, and that will pop up. It's on YouTube. It's free. And it really will take you on the journey of, if you've ever asked the question, where does all my stuff come from? That will take you on the whole journey.
And I'll tell you, from a teacher's point of view, that free aspect of the documentary is the best part, because instead of having to go through a paywall or something like that to show students content, and the message of that was so I love the way. How much of a role did you have? You were present for the production of the whole thing, right? You had a say in how it was formatted and filmed and everything.
Well, I mean, that was all down to the team, the really excellent team. I'm a writer, right? So I helped with research, with sourcing, finding the people who appeared on screen. But in order to make a documentary like that, it is a sizable team, and subcontractors, like people who go out in the field and just shoot footage. I mean, there's footage in that documentary that was shot from a helicopter by a company that normally shoots for Hollywood movies, but it's footage of the Port of LA. So yeah, a lot of people are involved, and I can only take credit for kind of writing the book that inspired it, and then just kind of helping out on the production side with sourcing and the rest. But all the hard work, that was all done by the producers of the documentary.
Because I love how it bookends itself with the people looking into their cameras, upset that they didn't get their shoes or their video games, and then at the end you see a message about the invasion of Ukraine, and it really puts things in perspective, for those of us who have these first world problems of I've had to wait 5 days for my when Amazon was first introduced, 5 days was pretty good actually for anything that you ordered that was on the other side of the world. So thank you, Christopher Mims, for joining the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, where everything, including Amazon, is indeed a primary source.
Thanks so much for having me.
Talk to you next time. I want to remind you about everythinghistory.com. It's the website for this show, the place for podcast karaoke bookings, and where you'll learn about my social studies consulting offerings as well. So type in everything-history.com to your browser today.